Crystal Bay was a small town on the New England coast. The main street, facing a beautiful bay where tourists came and went, was lined with historic buildings. Among them, Morrison's Kitchen was a family-run restaurant that had long been loved by the locals. Elizabeth Morrison was the first to arrive at the restaurant each morning, opening the windows to let in the fresh sea air. Sunlight illuminated the vintage wooden tables, spreading a warm glow throughout the space. Every time she stepped into this place filled with memories of her father George, a wave of nostalgia washed over her. "Good morning, Elizabeth." Early as usual, Michael Schmidt's voice called from the kitchen. He was a veteran chef from her father's era who had supported Elizabeth as her right-hand man since she took over the restaurant 10 years ago. "Good morning, Michael. I wanted to adjust the sauce for our new menu item," Elizabeth replied as she tied her apron. 10 years ago, when her father passed away suddenly from a heart attack, Elizabeth had just graduated from culinary school. With his death, the family's debts came to light, and she had to consider the future of the restaurant along with her mother Martha and sister Penelope. Back then, Morrison's Kitchen was just an unremarkable local diner. "Elizabeth, you should sell the restaurant," her mother had said. "You should hone your skills at a first-class restaurant in Chicago or New York. Don't waste your talent in this small establishment." But Elizabeth had other ideas. She was determined to breathe new life into the restaurant her father had loved. At first, both her mother and sister were skeptical, but Elizabeth didn't give up. She secured a loan from the bank and gradually transformed the restaurant, adding her own ideas to the traditional cuisine she had learned from her father. The first 3 years were a continuous struggle. However, Elizabeth's innovative cooking and warm hospitality gradually gained a reputation, attracting not only locals but tourists as well. By the 5th year, Morrison's Kitchen had grown into a popular restaurant where weekend reservations were hard to get. "Elizabeth, the new ingredients have arrived," Martha entered through the back door, carrying a box of vegetables. Though her mother outwardly acknowledged Elizabeth's efforts, there was always something else hidden in her eyes. "Thank you, Mom," Elizabeth answered as she took the box. "I can use these fresh herbs for tonight's special." Martha stood at the counter, watching her daughter's deft movements. "You really are like your father. He had the same passion for cooking." Elizabeth smiled, but she could sense the hidden meaning behind her mother's words. Martha was a traditional woman who clung to the old custom that, in the Morrison family, the second daughter inherits the family business. Despite Elizabeth essentially saving the restaurant and leading it to success, Martha's belief that her younger daughter Penelope was the rightful successor remained unchanged. "Is Penelope still sleeping?" Elizabeth asked while tasting the new sauce. "She seems to have been out late last night," Martha shrugged. "She should enjoy herself while she's young." Elizabeth nodded silently. Since graduating from college, Penelope had not held a steady job and only occasionally helped at the restaurant, never taking on a position of responsibility. Spoiled by her mother and benefiting from Elizabeth's success, she lived freely on her own terms. The kitchen door opened, and Penelope appeared. Unlike Elizabeth, she possessed a refined fashion sense and an air of confidence. "Good morning, everyone," she said cheerfully. "Anything I can help with? We have preparations for the 10th anniversary party today. Could you help with the table settings?" Elizabeth replied. "Of course." Penelope responded brightly, but there was a calculating gleam in her eyes. Elizabeth tasted the sauce and nodded with satisfaction. Tomorrow's anniversary party was meant to be a special day celebrating her 10 years of hard work and success. Local celebrities and food critics had been invited, and she planned to speak about her future prospects. Her next step was to expand Morrison's Kitchen further and open a branch in the neighboring town. She gazed at the beautiful ocean outside the window. When her father passed away, many people had doubted the future of this small restaurant. But Elizabeth's passion and talent had proven them wrong, and Morrison's Kitchen was now one of the most highly regarded restaurants in the region. Morrison's Kitchen had been transformed for the 10th anniversary party. With the Crystal Bay sunset as a backdrop, small white lights twinkled on the restaurant terrace, and an elegant sign was installed at the entrance. Golden letters reading, 10th Anniversary Celebration, with gratitude, swayed in the breeze. Elizabeth was busy with final preparations in the kitchen. The special course she had devised traced the history of Morrison's Kitchen. Beginning with traditional dishes from her father's time and progressing to Elizabeth's innovative creations, the menu told the story of her 10-year journey. Perfect, Elizabeth, Michael Schmidt stood beside her, smiling at the finished amuse-bouche. George would be proud. Elizabeth returned a grateful smile. Thank you, Michael. I couldn't have come this far without you. She left the kitchen and stepped into the elegantly decorated dining room. The tables were covered with fine linens, set with vintage silverware and delicate crystal glasses. Penelope was making final adjustments, arranging flowers she had selected for each table. Wonderful, Penny, Elizabeth called to her sister. The flower arrangements are beautiful. Penelope smiled with satisfaction. Thank you. I wanted to showcase my sense of style. She hesitated for a moment before continuing, Mom and I have something to tell you. But that can wait until later. Elizabeth frowned, but before she could respond, the bell rang to welcome the first guests. As soon as the party began, it was filled with energy. Local dignitaries, longtime regular customers, and the famous food critic Jane Hamilton all made appearances. Jane, the editor-in-chief of Boston Gourmet magazine, had written an article 5 years ago describing Morrison's Kitchen as New England's hidden gem, bringing Elizabeth's talent to the world's attention. Elizabeth, your success is truly remarkable, Jane said, raising her champagne glass. It's rare for a small-town restaurant to receive such recognition. Elizabeth nodded humbly. Thank you, Jane. Your article helped make our restaurant known to many people. Across the room, Martha and Penelope were deep in conversation with a local real estate agent. Elizabeth felt a little uneasy seeing this but was distracted by greetings from arriving guests. As dinner ended and dessert was being served, Martha tapped her glass lightly to get everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is a special evening celebrating Morrison's Kitchen's 10th anniversary. Let's ask my daughter Elizabeth to share some reflections on these 10 years. Amid applause, Elizabeth rose slowly. She began her prepared speech. 10 years ago, when my father passed away, the future of this restaurant was uncertain. But with everyone's support, the dedication of our staff, and the cooperation of my family, Morrison's Kitchen was able to open a new chapter. She paused and continued, I especially want to thank Michael Schmidt, who has supported us for many years, and all the staff who have been with us since those first difficult days. And most of all, I thank everyone here today and all those who love our restaurant. As applause erupted, Elizabeth was about to start discussing her future plans. For our upcoming plans, we. At that moment, Martha suddenly stood up and positioned herself next to her daughter. Elizabeth, wait a moment, she took the microphone and surveyed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special announcement tonight. Elizabeth looked at her mother in surprise. Martha's face wore an expression of determination. Today is truly a special day. Thanks to Elizabeth, Morrison's Kitchen has come this far, Martha smiled briefly at her daughter before continuing. And for the next chapter, following the traditions of the Morrison family, Penelope will be taking over the restaurant. The room fell silent for a moment. Elizabeth couldn't believe her ears. She couldn't hide her shock as she stared at her mother. Mom, what are you saying? But Penelope had already risen, raising her champagne glass high. With a beaming smile, she said, thanks for growing Morrison's Kitchen to this point, sis. Leave the rest to me. Elizabeth stood frozen. The guests showed expressions of confusion and surprise. Jane Hamilton frowned, and Michael Schmidt glared at Martha and Penelope with anger in his eyes. In our Morrison family, we have a tradition that the second daughter inherits the family business, Martha continued explaining in a calm voice. Elizabeth has done wonderful work. Thanks to her, this restaurant has succeeded. But now it's time to follow tradition. Elizabeth took a slow, deep breath. Her mind was in turmoil, but her professional pride supported her. From years of experience, she could maintain a smile without changing her expression. However, her eyes held deep sadness and the pain of betrayal. I see, she finally spoke. If that's the family's decision. Elizabeth slowly untied her apron and placed it on the table. It was a quiet gesture, but its meaning was clear. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each person who had supported her. Thank you all for everything over the years. Then she quietly headed toward the kitchen. The sound of the door closing echoed heavily through the room. The remaining guests were at a loss for words, while only Martha and Penelope wore thin smiles. Elizabeth's apartment was located on a hill in town, with windows overlooking the beautiful Sea of Crystal Bay. However, she had no leisure to enjoy the view. 3 days had passed since the anniversary party, and Elizabeth had barely gone out or answered her phone. She sat on the sofa, jotting down ideas in her sketchbook. Since childhood, she had always shaped her culinary ideas when facing difficulties to avoid losing herself. This time was no exception. What should I do now? Looking out the window, Elizabeth questioned herself. She never imagined that 10 years of effort would end like this. Deep down, she knew her mother valued family traditions, but she never imagined she would take the restaurant away from her in such a public manner. The phone rang, and after hesitating for a moment, she picked up the receiver. Hello, this is Elizabeth. Elizabeth, it's Michael, the veteran chef's voice came through the phone. Are you all right? Everyone's worried. Elizabeth let out a small sigh. Thank you, Michael. I just need some time. I understand. But I thought you should know what's happening at the restaurant. Michael's voice was tinged with concern. Penelope has been in charge since yesterday, and honestly, things are in chaos. She doesn't understand the basics of cooking, and the way she treats the staff. Elizabeth closed her eyes. Michael, I'm sorry, but I don't want to hear about that right now. I apologize. I just wanted to say that everyone thinks you'll come back. Especially for your special sauce, we can't make the signature dish without it. Elizabeth smiled. That sauce recipe was hers alone. Penelope had asked for the recipe several times, but Elizabeth always gave vague answers. Anyway, let me know if there's anything I can do to help, Michael said. We're your team, Elizabeth. After hanging up, Elizabeth went to the kitchen and brewed coffee. Michael's words encouraged her but also brought a new realization. For 10 years, she had devoted everything to the restaurant. But was that truly the life she wanted? She had started to preserve her father's legacy, but somewhere along the way, her own dreams had taken a back seat. This might be a chance for a new beginning. She murmured while looking at her sketchbook. It contained concepts for innovative cuisine she had nurtured for years, a modern approach to traditional New England cooking. Ideas that couldn't be realized at Morrison's kitchen. Elizabeth's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a call from the bank. Ms. Morrison, this is John Pearson. I'd like to confirm some details about the change of ownership at Morrison's kitchen. Elizabeth was surprised. Change of ownership? I haven't signed any documents. Yes, that's the issue. Your mother and Ms. Penelope submitted paperwork, but due to the loan, we need your approval. Elizabeth frowned. What loan are you referring to? The loan you applied for 3 months ago for expansion work and kitchen equipment upgrades. A $400,000 loan has been approved with your personal guarantee. Elizabeth caught her breath. She had planned to renovate the restaurant and secured a loan from the bank. The loan was in her personal name, and if the restaurant's ownership changed, the terms would change as well. I understand. I'll visit the bank later. As she hung up, a smile appeared on Elizabeth's face for the first time. The situation was more complex than she thought. It might not be as simple as just leaving the restaurant. Meanwhile, at Morrison's kitchen, Penelope was struggling with her first lunch service. What is this soup? I didn't order this. Penelope raised her voice in the kitchen. Michael answered calmly, Table 9, Mr. Murphy, orders this soup every Wednesday. Elizabeth makes it specially for him. But I don't know about that. Why serve something that's not on the menu? The kitchen staff exchanged glances. They all took pride in working under Elizabeth. She remembered individual regular customers' preferences and responded to special requests. That was part of Morrison's kitchen's charm. Martha tried to calm her daughter's anger. Penny, relax. This is how we do things. But it's inefficient. We need to modernize the restaurant, Penelope insisted. Elizabeth's methods are old-fashioned. She headed to the register, trying to learn the new reservation system but quickly showed irritation. Elizabeth had managed all reservations and regular customer information, but Penelope found learning these details tedious. By afternoon, more problems arose. When Tom Jenkins, the main food supplier, came for delivery, Penelope knew nothing about payments to him. Elizabeth always paid in full at the end of the month, Tom explained. But since there's a new owner, we need to review the payment terms. Penelope was confused. I'll ask Elizabeth. You don't know. Tom looked surprised. Elizabeth is sponsoring our children's soccer team. In return, I provide the highest quality ingredients at special prices. Penelope held her head. The network and relationships Elizabeth had built were more complex than she had imagined. By the end of the afternoon service, several complaints had come in, and staff morale had declined. The quality of the food had clearly deteriorated. What should I do? Penelope asked her mother. Martha gazed worriedly out the window. We need to get Elizabeth to come back. She won't return, Penelope said bitterly. Not after leaving like that. As they were talking, Jane Hamilton entered the restaurant. She fixed Martha and Penelope with a cold stare. Martha, where is your daughter? Her tone was severe. If you mean Elizabeth, she's taking a little vacation, Martha answered vaguely. Vacation? After that scene. Jane wore an expression of disbelief. You don't understand what she has built. I came all the way from Boston just to eat her cooking. She turned on her heel and left. Penelope looked at her mother, feeling anxious for the first time. That night, Penelope and Martha visited Elizabeth's apartment. After knocking on the door, there was a long silence. When the door finally opened, Elizabeth regarded them with a calm expression. What do you want? Her voice revealed no emotion. Elizabeth, please help us, Penelope said in a voice near tears. I don't understand so many things. This is the path you chose, Elizabeth said calmly. You wanted to follow tradition, didn't you? Martha placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Elizabeth, please. For the family. Elizabeth stared at them for a while before saying, Family? If you were truly family, you wouldn't have taken everything from me in such a public way. As she was about to close the door, Penelope cried out, The loan. The bank contacted us. What should we do? Elizabeth smiled quietly. That's also part of the path you chose. The door closed, and Martha and Penelope stood there at a loss. Meanwhile, inside Elizabeth's apartment, several people had gathered around her dining table. Michael Schmidt, Jane Hamilton, and Robert Carter, the most successful real estate agent in town. On the table were blueprints spread out, showing the concept for a new restaurant. Ease Bistro, elegant, exciting, and essential, Elizabeth explained. In a small cafe in Crystal Bay, Elizabeth overheard two women talking. While focusing on her coffee, she couldn't help but listen. Morrison's Kitchen isn't the same anymore. I went there last week, and that signature dish was completely different. The sauce was somehow different, one said. The other replied, I heard reservations have been getting cancelled one after another since Elizabeth left. 3 weeks had passed, and the situation at Morrison's Kitchen was rapidly deteriorating. Elizabeth frequently overheard such conversations from townspeople. However, her heart was already moving toward the next step. In front of a stone building at the edge of the old town, Elizabeth stood with Robert Carter. The building was small but had a terrace with an ocean view and faced a street where tourists flowed. I signed the contract, Robert, she said as she received the keys. Will we make it in time for next week's opening? No problem, Robert smiled. The rumors are already spreading. About Elizabeth Morrison's new restaurant. Elizabeth entered the building. The interior was old-fashioned, but her eyes saw endless possibilities. Michael Schmidt was already inside, checking the kitchen space. Perfect, Michael said with satisfaction. Smaller than Morrison's, but we can design it efficiently. Thank you, Michael. I'm glad you're here with me, Elizabeth said with heartfelt gratitude. Michael nodded. Half of Morrison's staff have already submitted their resignations. They all want to work here. Meanwhile, at Morrison's kitchen, Martha and Penelope sat before a letter from the bank. Payments are overdue. Martha read from the letter. Full repayment required within 3 months. Otherwise, foreclosure of the collateral property. Penelope covered her face with her hands. Mom, what should we do? We don't have that kind of money. We have to talk to Elizabeth, Martha resolved. She'll know what to do. However, when they visited Elizabeth's apartment, she was not there. After walking around town, they finally found her at the stone building in the old town, and their eyes widened in surprise. A sign reading E's Bistro had already been installed, and several workers were proceeding with interior construction inside. Elizabeth. Martha called out to her daughter. What are you doing? Elizabeth turned around calmly. Opening a new restaurant. Next week. But. Penelope stammered. What about Morrison's? That's your problem, isn't it? Elizabeth's voice was as cold as ice. It's what you wanted. Martha took out the letter. What about the loan issue? The bank is demanding full repayment. Elizabeth stared at the two of them for a while before slowly saying, business is determined by ability, not emotions. You need to learn that. The week passed, and the opening day of E's Bistro arrived. The whole town was buzzing with rumors. Elizabeth's innovative cuisine concept and sophisticated yet warm atmosphere had created a reputation, and reservations were booked a month in advance even before opening. Elizabeth was making final preparations in the kitchen. Around her were staff who had come from Morrison's. Their faces were filled with joy and expectation. Everyone, today is the beginning of something new, Elizabeth said. We're not just opening a restaurant, we're creating a place to express our passion and creativity. Michael placed his hand on her shoulder. We're ready. Let's open the doors. The first day was a great success. Customers were impressed with her new menu, and her famous sauce used in new dishes was particularly praised. Jane Hamilton also visited, taking earnest notes about the restaurant and food. Wonderful, Elizabeth, Jane said after closing. I'll write an article about tonight's experience. It will be a feature story. The following week, Boston Gourmet magazine published an article with the headline, Genius Chef's Resurrection, Innovation Born from Genuine Passion. The article praised E's Bistro and highly commended Elizabeth's talent and perseverance. And at the end, it read. Meanwhile, the once-renowned Morrison's kitchen seems to be rapidly declining. The decrease in food quality under new management and service disruptions due to inexperience have been noted. This proves that tradition alone cannot survive in today's competitive restaurant industry. Martha and Penelope read the article and were devastated. The restaurant was losing customers, staff kept quitting, and debts were mounting. Final notices from the bank had also arrived, and Morrison's kitchen's future was shrouded in darkness. It's over, Martha said, looking around the empty restaurant. Not yet, Penelope said with a determined voice. Let's ask Elizabeth to teach us. I may not even come close to her level, but I'm ready to learn. The two headed to E's Bistro. Entering the full restaurant, they saw Elizabeth chatting with guests. She seemed more confident and vibrant than before. Martha clutched Penelope's hand. As they approached, Elizabeth stopped her conversation and looked at them. We'd like to talk, Martha said in a small voice. Elizabeth nodded slightly, and the three went out to the terrace. Against the backdrop of Crystal Bay's night view, Martha spoke first. I was wrong, Elizabeth. I clung to my own values and ignored your talent and efforts. I'm truly sorry. Penelope, with tears in her eyes, said, I realized how immature I was. The restaurant is on the verge of bankruptcy, but we brought this on ourselves. Elizabeth looked at them silently for a while. Anger and sadness were swirling inside her, but she also felt a strange sense of liberation. Morrison's kitchen is my father's legacy, she finally spoke. It would be sad to see it lost. There's nothing we can do, Martha said resignedly. Elizabeth took a deep breath and said, there is one way. Martha and Penelope looked at her with hope. I'll buy Morrison's, Elizabeth said quietly. But I have conditions. A year later, Crystal Bay was bustling with the summer tourist season. 2 restaurants stood side by side on Main Street, both thriving. Morrison's Kitchen as a warm traditional family restaurant, and E's Bistro as a high-end establishment offering innovative cuisine, each loved by different clientele. The seasoning on this roast beef is perfect, Penny. In Morrison's Kitchen's kitchen, Elizabeth said as she tasted her sister's cooking. Relief spread across Penelope's face. A year ago, when Elizabeth bought Morrison's Kitchen, her condition was that Penelope would relearn cooking from the basics. Though resistant at first, she gradually awakened to the joy and depth of cooking and was now growing into a fine chef. Thank you, sis, Penelope said sincerely. I couldn't have come this far without your guidance. Elizabeth smiled. The solution she had proposed was to manage 2 restaurants. Morrison's Kitchen would preserve traditional cooking as the family legacy, while at E's Bistro, she could fully express her creativity. And Penelope would learn cooking from scratch, eventually taking over Morrison's management. Martha also entered the kitchen. She looked at her daughters with tears in her eyes. You're both so wonderful. I'm proud of you. Martha had changed significantly too. She had abandoned her old values and now properly appreciated both daughters' talents. She now handled accounting and reservation management for both restaurants and used her experience to advise local women entrepreneurs. I should start preparing for the evening service at E's Bistro, Elizabeth prepared to leave the kitchen. Did you see the Food Critics article the other day? Penelope asked proudly. Crystal Bay was introduced as a gourmet town with 2 excellent restaurants. I did, Elizabeth smiled. And next, you'll be introduced as Morrison's head chef. Penelope looked at her sister with a serious expression. Elizabeth, that day, the day of the anniversary party, I was really wrong. I still feel sorry about it. Elizabeth placed her hand on her sister's shoulder. The past is the past. What matters is what you've learned from the experience. You've grown, Penny. Martha approached the 2 and placed her hand over theirs. We're family. From now on, let's recognize each other's strengths and support one another. That evening, on the terrace of E's Bistro, Elizabeth gazed at the sunset sinking into the sea. It had been an unexpected journey, but as a result, she had realized her dreams and built new bonds with her family. Good evening, Elizabeth. Turning around, she saw David Clark, the owner of a famous restaurant group from Boston. I heard about your restaurant's reputation and came to see for myself. Elizabeth smiled and extended her hand. Welcome, David. I'll prepare a special dinner for you. As she headed to the kitchen, she thought to herself, when she removed her apron and walked out that anniversary night, she thought it was the end. But in reality, it was the beginning of a new and better chapter in her life.